Sorry about that. So I'm just going to go through my notes here. And well, first and foremost, thank you for all who were able to attend the pitch competition. It was really a lot of fun to put together and to watch all 5 of the presentations. We had our first place winner, which was chosen by our judges. And our first place was Frozen Dead Librarians on Thawing the Undead in Our Local Economy. That was from the Netherlands Community Library, presented by Electra and Michael. They had so much energy and a great initiative, and that was for the grand prize of $2,000. For our second place, we had Square One Small Business Services, helping food trucks, and that was for the Mid-Continent Public Library. That was presented by Hannah Taylor, and that was for the second prize of $500. And then we also had the opportunity for the audience to choose their Audience Choice Award for an additional $500. And that was given to Excel Corona, Workforce and Innovation Services. That was presented by Ashley and Danielle from Corona Public Library. And then we had our runner-ups. So our first runner-up, and for a total of $100, that was Rejuvenating America Through Skilled Technical Trades. And that was presented by Sherry Simpson for the Pope County Library System. And then we also had our runner-up for $100 as well. Project Click, Connecting Local Entrepreneurs with Worldwide Markets. And that was presented by Cindy and Camellia from Wayne County Public Library. So we'll definitely have this up on our website so everyone could, again, see the names and titles. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And again, huge congratulations to our winners for the pitch competition. Now I just want to quickly recognize the amazing group of professionals who served on the ELC planning team. Each member of the team has contributed so much of their time and energy and expertise to make the ELC a reality. I, as well as, I'm speaking for Steve and Morgan, the other co-chairs, want to thank each member of the team publicly. So I'm going to go through the list. There's quite a few of us, but I'm going to start with Angel Truesdale, UNC Charlotte, Andrea Lewandowski, New Jersey State Library, Anna Milholland, College of William and Mary, Ash Faulkner, Ohio State University, Christopher Anglum, University of the District of Columbia, Carrie Tone, University of Toronto, Christina Adams, High Point Public Library, Deanna Day, Small Business and Technology Development Center, Jillian Robbins, Free Library of Philadelphia, Business Resource and Innovation Center, Marlinda Cairo, Houston Community College, Cassie Edifa, High Point Public Library, Catherine Makins, Durham County Library, Mary Abernathy, Salem College, Mimi Curley, Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, Morgan Ritchie-Baum, Greensboro Public Library, Natalie Blass, Loyola Marymount University, Orlando Duffus, University of Houston, Sarah Thin, Alamance Community College, Steve Kramer, UNC Greensboro, Summer Kristevska, Wake Forest University, Susie Corbett, North Carolina Biotechnology Center, and Velopin, Fayetteville State University. And last but not least, Duncan Smith with EBSCO. Thank you all sincerely from the bottom of my heart. And I know from Steve and Morgan, we appreciate everything that you've done to make this a wonderful, productive, 2 days for, entrepreneurship. And we're just really excited to work with such a great team of people. Thanks, guys. Yay. Give a round of applause to these people. Awesome. Great. Okay. Well, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Susie Corbett, who will introduce herself as well as today's keynote speaker.
Hi, thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone, as she said, to day 2 and to the second plenary session. My name is Susie Corbett, and I am the Vice President for Life Science Intelligence at the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. My team of librarians performs market research and competitive intelligence for life sciences entrepreneurs and startups all across the state. And that makes me especially interested in hearing today's session presented by Ashley Brown. Ashley is the Director of Research Services at the Kenan Institute of Private Enterprise at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's Kenan Flagler Business School. The Kenan Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank and is home to a number of affiliated centers, each of which focuses on timely topics for business. Ashley leads a team of data scientists and research associates to support institute-sponsored, faculty-led research projects. Additionally, she oversees the Kenan Institute's translational research efforts, including the Kenan Insight Series and the Trends in Entrepreneurship report. She holds master's degrees in library science and in public administration from UNC Chapel Hill, and a bachelor's degree in journalism and history from Indiana University. To talk about trends in entrepreneurship, please join me in welcoming Ashley Brown.
Hi, thank you. Can you all hear me all right? Good. Well, first, thank you so much for having me here today. Just want to apologize. I know everyone's working from home, so if you hear my dog in the background at some point, that might happen. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see that all right? And we will pop that up.
Looks good, Ashley. Thank you.
Thank you. So Susie said, I am Ashley Brown. I am the Director of Research Services at the Kenan Institute at UNC Kenan Flagler Business School. And today I want to talk about our Trends in Entrepreneurship report, which we released in January 2020 at our Frontiers of Entrepreneurship conference. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Trends in Entrepreneurship report is, a little bit give you some information about behind the scenes and how we produced the report and some of our plans going on into the future. Then ways that you can use and contribute to the report. I want to highlight a few of the trends. I can't cover everything in both the annual report and some of our updates since, but hopefully the trends that I would choose, the topics that I've chosen will be of interest. And then I have a call to action for you all, as well as some additional resources from the Institute, and hopefully some time for a Q&A at the end. So I want to start off with what is the Trends in Entrepreneurship report. So the goals of this report is really to give timely insights into topics that affect entrepreneurs, funders, ecosystem partners, policymakers, and others within the innovation economy. You know, at UNC Chapel Hill, we have amazing research faculty, but sometimes it's really hard to get the research out of the academy and out into a space that's, you know, applicable and actionable for those who are practicing. And so we at the Kenan Institute, in partnership with our affiliated center, the Center for Entrepreneurship, had this idea to put together a report that really helps connect the dots between rigorous academic research, data analysis and visualization, expert insights from both those in academia, but also those in industry, and help try to connect all those dots together in a report that really helps tell a story about some of the trends and timely topics in entrepreneurship and innovation. And so we released our report in January. We have had 2 updates since then in June and just last week, but I will talk about those in a second. First, I want to give you a little bit more information about who we are. So the Kenan Institute, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank affiliated with Kenan Flagler. We have 10 different affiliated centers that run the gamut in business topics. So the Entrepreneurship Center is just one of our 10 centers. Others include the Institute for Private Capital, CREATE, which is our economic development arm, urban investment strategies, which is run by Professor Jim Johnson, tax center, real estate, and a few others. One of our main priorities recently has been this translation of business research. So much like you think about in the life sciences, you're in the lab, and how do you translate, the work and the research in the lab into a product or a vaccine or whatever. We want to do the same thing. How do we take what's being, produced and researched in our business school and, maybe published in, academic journals, but then really hasn't found a vehicle to get out into into a general audience, into industry leaders. So we're really trying to be that voice for our scholars through our Kenan Insight series, white papers, videos, social media, and more. And then I've also provided a link to the UNC Entrepreneurship Center. They have some student-facing programs, but they're also really engaged in thought leadership in the entrepreneurial space. And the neat part about entrepreneurship as a topic for translational research is just how interdisciplinary it is. We have a strategy and entrepreneurship area at Kenan Flagler, but we're also pulling from accounting, we're pulling from finance, operations, organizational behavior, but then we're also looking at other parts of our university, including public policy, some of the life sciences, computer science, to pull some of this research as well, sociology. So when we decided to develop out the trends in entrepreneurship, we knew that we needed kind of a broad set of experts to help inform what was going to be in the report. So as I said earlier, the report was really born out of our Frontiers of Entrepreneurship conference that's been happening for 4 or 5 years now. And it's really a place where we bring together academics and industry together to talk about some of these pressing issues. And so we decided to pull from kind of a group of those folks. We partner with several different schools, including Wharton, Stanford, the Entrepreneurship Center at University of Chicago, Duke, INE, and Yale to put on this conference. And so we pulled some of their faculty together, as well as our faculty, to put together working groups to help develop out the content. We also then asked our industry partners to provide some insights based on this research. And then, a lot of the grunt work was done by the research services team, our external affairs team, which helped a lot with the editing, design. And then obviously the UNC Entrepreneurship Center was a big part of this. So for our first report, it was kind of a lofty first go. We chose 5 themes, or 5 broad topic areas, I would say. They're funding, teams and talent, ecosystems, emerging technology, and DEI. We really saw DEI as kind of a thread throughout, rather than just kind of standalone topic. I will say this first report probably leans a little bit more into the funding. We have really strong finance faculty, including our director, who is finance faculty, and the research director for the Institute for Private Capital. And so we have a lot of information in this first report on, VC markets, funding for small businesses, that sort of thing. And then you can see on the right here, the trends from the annual report. Those are just kind of the subtopics or the trends themselves pulled out, so you can see what is in the report. We also have, we did a June update, and the update was really looking at, the response to COVID. We know that entrepreneurial and small businesses were really affected. We'll do another update in our annual report, because obviously June was pretty soon after things started to take place. It's when a lot of the federal policies started to come out, and we saw some more actions over the summer. In November, we wanted to focus on diversity. There's kind of a two different topics here. One is focused on immigrant entrepreneurship, both kind of Main Street immigrant entrepreneurship, and then also high-skilled immigrant entrepreneurship. So we talk a lot about the H-1B visas and the implications for innovation in America. And then next we look at recruiting and hiring diverse teams. And that's one of the trends that I'll go through today. That one was something that's really important for the Entrepreneurship Center. One of the things that they are focusing on is this concept of scale school. They really want to work with companies to help them scale. And so one part of scaling is, you're starting to build your team, you're starting to hire more. And so how do you do that in a way where you're recruiting and hiring the best talent, which is, diverse talent. And so not only do we want to, kind of shine a light on some of the data and research around the topic, but then also provide our constituents kind of, here are some strategies, some evidence-based strategies that you can employ as you scale. So before I get into the trends themselves, I do want to talk a little bit about how you can use and contribute the report. We really do encourage you to use it and share it. We have a website, frontiers.unc.edu, where you can get all of the reports and also some of the related Kenan insights. Discuss it, send it to faculty, send it to other folks, entrepreneurs, folks in your communities who might find the information useful, but also who might be interested in contributing. We are open to feedback, and we also are open to what are some of your ideas for future research. You guys are on the front lines working with students and faculty and community members and entrepreneurs and ecosystem partners. So you hear a lot about, what are people thinking and talking and struggling with, and what are ways that we could use research to kind of inform some of these ideas coming out of your constituents. So feel free to email us. We are in the process of putting together a more an easier way to contribute trends, including a template that folks can use. So now I'm going to go into I want to go into talk about some of the trends. Before I do that, are there any questions about how we came about the Institute or about the Entrepreneurship Center before I kind of dig deep into some of the information here? All right. I don't know if it's in the chat or if people just want to.
Nothing so far, Ashley.
Okay, great. Well, then we will just go ahead and kind of dig into this. So I picked out a couple of different topics to talk about. One thing I do want to talk about real quick is that, that this is just a start, that this first report was really kind of laying some of the groundwork. We're already starting to go through the process of figuring out, okay, what are trends that we can update from the last report, especially in light of COVID? And then what are some things that are, seemed a little bit more special topic and that we might want to revisit in a few years, but there's probably not much more we can add. The other thing I want to say is, I support this, my team helps support this project, doing a lot of the literature reviews, pulling a lot of the data and doing the analysis, but we're not entrepreneurship experts in the way that our faculty are. And so a lot of these slides are from our faculty and from others in the space. So just to warn you, if there's a question I can't answer, I'm happy to write them down and get back to you. So one of the places I wanted to start is about the state of entrepreneurship, this conversation about, is it really in decline? Obviously things are a little different now that we're in COVID. We're in a little bit of a wait and see to see kind of what are the long-term impacts. But we were talking with our faculty, and this is kind of a big debate within the academic space about, is entrepreneurship in decline? And so there's, one school of thought that's like, yes, it's definitely in decline. You can see it in the data with the firm entry and exit rates. And then other folks are saying, well, it depends on how you look at the data, and overall quality of entrepreneurship has actually increased, and we have, higher quality, high growth ventures. So, it's a debate within the academic literature that we thought was worth discussing. One thing I don't include on the slides here, but that is in the report, is that we also need to talk about like segmentation of types of firms. a lot of times when we talk about entrepreneurship, we think of these high growth kind of tech startups, but there are different segments of firms and different, types of entrepreneurs. So we get into that a little bit more in the report. When we talk about is entrepreneurship in decline, it's kind of this broader definition. And as you can see, we have this conversation around business dynamism and that we do, over the last 30, 40 years, we have seen a decline. It's that process by which firms are continually born and fail and expand and contract, job creation and destruction. What we're really seeing is that you see the slowing down, that there's less entrepreneurial activity over time. But then there's another school who says, simply put, alternative definitions of entrepreneurship suggest different assessments of the state of American entrepreneurship. So these folks are really looking at the high quality, the quality of startups. We're seeing record level venture capital investments, even in COVID. And so it's really about, how we define and how we want to measure entrepreneurship. And so it's always about data with our faculty, right? And how you look and assess and whether or not you even have enough data, which you never have enough data is what I've learned. And so we got some really interesting expert insights for this one. And so we've got a combination of some folks who are faculty, some folks who are industry. Olaf Sorensen, he's now at UCLA. He was at Yale, but he was a huge contributor to this report, provided a lot of feedback. And so, he really gets to the fact that we really need some better data. We've seen this decline based on census data. A lot of cases of self-employment in that data. And so, for him, it's about considering a broader range of indicators.
So Ashley,
yeah,
we have a couple of comments or questions you might want to address because they might be pertinent to what you were just speaking about. Steve is asking that, or stating that many of us know that tracking entrepreneurship can be challenging. Mm-hmm. Does the business dynamics stats separate establishment starts from firm starts? And is that a relevant question? And secondly, is high quality linked to VC and tech entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so the question, so the first one, it's establishment, I believe. It's the establishment firm, and it does separate it. We have a long kind of discussion. In our report, we do explain the difference between establishments and firms, right? So your firm is going to be your higher level, your establishment is kind of your one location. And so it does separate those, I believe. And then for your second question about quality, I'll have to send you this paper because we have this section down here about how you measure high quality. They have their own methodology for capturing that. And so it's about different firm characteristics. I don't remember specifically about VC funding, but I can send you that paper, or it's also, you can find it here. We link to it in the report. And so we had Arlen Hamilton come speak at the conference, and she was also kind enough to provide us some of her insights based on the report that we had provided her. Arlen is the founder and managing partner at Backstage Capital. And so they really focus on investing in underrepresented founders. And so for Arlen, her experience, especially her experience in Silicon Valley, is that they have very high quality investment opportunities and high potential entrepreneurs at the early stage. We have Marianne Feldman, who really provides us the public policy take on this. Marianne is the director of Create at UNCCH, which really has that economic development arm. And so she's looking at how entrepreneurship and more, how that can help kind of local and regional economies. And then finally, we got Ryan Decker. He's actually one of the authors of several of the kind of prominent papers about the decline in business Zionism. I believe some of those papers were published while he was a PhD student in Maryland, but he is now a senior economist at the Federal Reserve Board. But he makes a good point that, you know, there's a discrepancy between these aggregate statistics and kind of the anecdotal feel in Silicon Valley and in VC funding data. And so, you know, that nuanced data about this decline is kind of important for researchers to think about and to maybe even struggle with, and more opportunities, I think, for research there. So I'm going to kind of go off that section, and like I said in the report, we have quite a bit of data on financing entrepreneurial firms, both kind of your high growth, high tech, you know, firms that are going to be going out there fundraising from venture capitalists, but we also have quite a bit of data on kind of smaller businesses and funding mechanisms. We'll probably update that with all of the COVID additions that we've seen. But I wanted to kind of skip forward and kind of build this story out of research that we have done around founding teams. The area chair for our strategy and entrepreneurship group, as well as the faculty research director for the Entrepreneurship Center, is a strategy researcher, Chris Bingham. And so he helped us put together this section. And we really think this is useful for kind of our ecosystem service providers, as well as our entrepreneurs, to think about how this information could be applied as they're helping, you know, teams start and form and grow over time. So first we talk about who makes up founding teams. So when you're forming co-founding teams, you know, the research really shows that folks tend to gravitate towards individuals with similar backgrounds or experiences. You know, it's a lot about interpersonal fit between individuals, but then that does mean that, you know, your networks tend to look very similar to yourself. This is kind of important when we start talking about, you know, as we hire more diverse teams. And so Chris Bingham's research really does look at the co-founder relationships and kind of looking at co-founders versus solo founders. And so, so it's really this question, you know, there's pros and cons to co-founding teams versus solo founding. And he makes a good point that, you know, even if you're a solo founder, the caveat is that you're never alone, really. There's a lot of co-creators that go into making, that go into your business. And so a couple of things that I want to pull from his insights and that I think would be useful for you all is just this concept of liability of newness. And so in his view, there needs to be more research on, you know, there's a liability of being new and starting up and not necessarily knowing exactly what you're doing at any given point. And so co-founders, you know, can kind of pull from each other and each other's expertise. Solo founders, you know, there's this sense that could potentially be over their head. You know, research kind of indicates that VCs can be hesitant to actually invest in companies involving a solo founder. And so I think, you know, these dynamics between co-founders and solo founders is something that the research hasn't dug deep enough into. And so it's something that our area is looking more into. We've done quite a bit of research over at American Underground in Durham. We had a PhD student, Travis Howell, who's now, I think, at UC Irvine, who did quite a bit of work looking at these co-founder dynamics and interviewing solo versus co-founding teams. And so I'm going to go back up here. So when you're, you know, co-founding a team, you know, the advantage is that there is this wider skill set. You have more people to pull from, more resources, especially if you're going to be bootstrapping. You know, you also have the shared experience. On the flip side, you also can incur more conflict There can be a power struggle. I believe one of our data points here is that co-founders are the central cause of startup failure as a result of conflicts among the co-founders. And so it's just a delicate balance. And so when you think about, we go back to this concept of recruiting and hiring diverse teams. This is kind of a question that our Entrepreneurship Center thinks a whole lot about. They're working with students, they're working with folks in the UNC community, in RDU, Raleigh-Durham area. And so they're thinking a lot about the dynamics between, co-founders. They're thinking about how do you help companies grow and scale from that first employee, to 50 to 500, and really how do you attract, recruit, and hire the best talent. And so this is kind of a corporate imperative for everybody, right? It's not just for entrepreneurs, but it's something that, for startups, it's something that everyone needs to think about, or all companies need to think about and have been thinking about. And mainly this is, a lot of it's due to workforce demographics. They're changing. And the research also points that, diverse leadership and diverse teams produces better performance and more innovation. And so it's critical to business success to think about these issues from the start. And so we have a professor out of our Urban Investment Strategies Center, Dr. Jim Johnson. Jim Johnson is a demographer, and something that he talks a lot about is just this concept of the multi-generational workforce, and then also the changing racial and ethnic makeup of the workforce. And so, you have millennials who became the largest generation in the workforce, overtaking baby boomers. They're, more racially and ethnically diverse than their predecessors. And the generation coming up behind millennials, I believe we're calling them Generation Z, are also, more diverse than their predecessors. Beyond that, you have this multi-generational workforce, right? You have boomers who want to stay beyond age 65. You have Generation Z who are entering the workforce. And so there's a lot going on. And so there's this kind of corporate imperative, or business imperative, I should say, to really think about how these workforces, how to create environments that are inclusive of these changing demographics. And so, there's a lot of literature about why diverse teams matter. We wanted to point it out here and kind of bring it together in one space. These next few slides, they're not comprehensive of all the literature out there, but I think they're a starting point. So one thing that we see why diversity matters is better performance, including financial performance. I will say that for some of these, we do pull from some of the consulting firms' reports like McKinsey. I feel like the academic literature hasn't quite caught up there, but it's starting to get there. And so McKinsey found, that companies outperform their peers if they have higher levels of racial and ethnic and gender diversity. You also see increased innovation. And that's teams across business in academia, science. You see one of the kind of a prominent study was out of Harvard about looking at scientific papers. And the more diverse co-authors were cited more frequently and published in higher impact journals. We also pulled a data point out of our immigrant entrepreneurship section, which really shows that, immigrants also help U.S. Native inventors be more productive. Working together leads to kind of higher quality or higher innovative output. And then finally, diversity matters because it helps you attract more talent. And so when job seekers are kind of evaluating their offers and they're looking at their companies, especially folks in the millennial generation, but also women and underrepresented minorities, they're really looking for a workforce that's kind of representative and reflective of their values and of who they are. And so they often measure diversity as an important component when when applying and then accepting a position. But one of the things we've heard a lot about in the news, we know that diverse teams perform better. We know that, it's important, keep saying it's a business imperative. But companies really still struggle with it, and you see it a lot in the news. And so we kind of point that out. The CEO of Wells Fargo recently came under fire when he said there's a very limited pool of Black talent to recruit from. When discussing why Wells Fargo hadn't met their diversity goals, there's a lot of talk about Facebook, Apple, a lot of the big tech firms still really struggling to diversify and honestly retain their workforce. And so LinkedIn had a really interesting survey about from executives figuring out what they perceived as the barriers to improving diversity. And a lot of people, found finding diverse candidates to interview kind of one of their barriers, retaining diverse employees. We make an argument here that it's not a, just a recruiting problem, that a lot of these struggles within developing a diverse workforce comes from the kind of the culture and retaining workers. You fail to retain workers, and they're your biggest advocates, is that we found, your current workforce helps kind of advocate and recruit, new people into your organization. And so when you have a culture that isn't conducive or inclusive, then you're going to have trouble recruiting. And so there's a lot of different data points on this. I think I deleted a couple of the slides for this presentation. But one of the interesting studies was a study of 550 women from the Association of Women in Sciences. Nearly 2/3 of women surveyed reported to have to deal with prove it again bias, so that needing to demonstrate their expertise time and time again. This was especially high for Black women. And then also more blatantly, 1/3 of women reported sexual harassment. And then this McKinsey Lean In report was really interesting because it talked about one of the barriers for women is that kind of broken rung, and that women are more likely to be overlooked for that first promotion, which then into a managerial position, which then kind of affects the trajectory of your career. And so then here's a couple more data points about Black STEM employees experiencing racial and ethnic discrimination in their jobs. Again, the feeling of, being treated as being not competent or isolated. And so there's quite a bit of different data points in there. So as I said, our goals with this report is, we want to present the data, but we also want to present some of our industry experts who can speak to why these data points are important. And so one of the folks we have the UNC Entrepreneurship Center works with is Blessing. She's she's got a couple of different companies, but one of them is Mother Honestly, which is kind of a platform to support working mothers and to help women with that work and life balance. And if you have time later, I recommend you come back and read what she wrote. I think we're really seeing this right now in COVID. I think it was the job reports in September, is that folks are leaving. They're leaving the workforce. Women are leaving the workforce at greater rates than men during COVID, and a lot of it can be attributed to kind of their at-home responsibilities for kids, with kids going to virtual school, childcare centers shutting down, and so a huge burden has fallen on women and as they're leaving the workforce during this time. So again, just some additional data points. This is this is out of the ELC Commission report, out of the report in 2016. The data is a little dated, and again, this is about high-tech sector. It's kind of our proxy for the kind of high-growth startup firms, but it really speaks to the struggles that we're still seeing in hiring and retaining underrepresented minorities and women in these roles in the high tech kind of high growth sector, startup sector. So one thing that Vicki Gibbs and I at the Entrepreneurship Center talked a lot about is, okay, so what's going on here? Is it kind of an ecosystem problem broadly? And so, one thing you see is that, startup boards themselves aren't very diverse. And so, compared to public companies, which are growing, their boards are growing more diverse. And this is partially due to legislation we've seen in the last few years. Startup boards tend to be less diverse than their public counterparts. So for example, a survey of 200 venture-backed startup boards of firms that had either 100 million in funding or were valued above 500 million, women only held 7% of the board seats. And a majority of the cases where women were on the board, it was just one woman. And so 60% of private firms did not have a single woman on their board. So in comparison, there is currently no all male boards within the S&P 500. And so Vicki was asking, she was like, well, what we find is a lot of times startup boards are developed, from your executives and then from your funders. And so we did find that a majority of, board seats go to executives and venture capitalists who are funding. And so, so that gets back to something we had talked about earlier about how founders, really pull from their social networks. And we've kind of find that, the same is true for venture capital, is that they're gravitating, to folks with some sort of commonality, some, similar, like if you went to the same university, you're more, as your funder, you're more likely to get invested in. And so we really wanted to talk about underrepresentation in venture capital, both from the standpoint of, we know that venture capital does not, that women and people of color are greatly underrepresented in raising venture capital. We had some of the kind of highest, in recent years, we've had quite a bit of venture capital, but you're just not seeing that getting funneled to people of color or founders of color or women founders. That diversification isn't really occurring. And kind of going back to Blessing's point about women leaving the workforce, we also saw in Q3 of 2020 was the lowest quarter for female founders in 3 years. And so it'll be interesting to see, if that's an effect of COVID and again, women having to kind of leave their roles to have to take care of children and other reasons. So you have underrepresentation in raising venture capital, but you also have underrepresentation in decision-making in venture capital. And so, people have started to look at this issue. There was a study out of, I believe, Stanford, that fewer than 1.3% of all global assets are being managed by people of color or women. There was someone out of one of the venture capital firms reviewed 200 venture capital firms and did the following demographic breakdown. That piece isn't as rigorous of research as you would get out of academics, but it's still a really interesting data point. And I thought what was most interesting is that when reviewing that, 40% of the these firms that they were looking at, and they were major Silicon Valley firms. 40% of them had gone to Stanford or Harvard. And so we presented this, or we provided this, this information to Chuck Easley, who's out of Stanford, ironically. And so he was talking a little bit about, how this has just been a persistent problem, right? Like this is, this has been a problem we've been talking about for a while. Folks have been trying to implement things, but, we've really made kind of nominal steps forward. So what is kind of the role in ecosystem partners, especially when you're looking at areas like our area, or in the Raleigh-Durham area, we're seeing tremendous growth. We're seeing, more investments. We're seeing some really great startup firms. What can we do with ecosystem partners to really kind of help our startups essentially do better? And so, kind of he really introduces this idea of if you have to start early. That's, the easiest place. It's harder to go back and kind of change and modify practices and culture. It can be done and should be done, but this idea of really you have to start early. And so in this report, we really wanted to say, okay, we've presented you all this data that says, here's a problem. Or here we know that diverse teams matter, that companies are more successful, but we also see that it's still a persistent problem. So next, we really wanted to give strategies for companies, especially companies that scale, kind of within that wheelhouse of the Entrepreneurship Center. We wanted to give them some strategies as they scale and they start to hire their workforce. It's something you could share with students. It's something you can share with, it doesn't just have to be, we've been talking a lot about kind of the high tech, high growth firms, but, there's a lot of businesses that will need to bring on a employer or several employees. And so I think these are strategies that can kind of go across the board. So the next couple of slides are really, they're about the potential downfalls. This comes from a Harvard Business Review article. No, this is for kind of broadly for all companies. It's not specific to startups or young firms. And I know that there are nuances for younger firms. And it's just an awareness that, you can implement some of these common strategies. And it's not to say that these strategies aren't worth implementing, but you have to be aware that there are some potential downfalls. And so you have to be kind of detailed oriented in how you implement them. So when you think about your diversity trainings, this research found that voluntary trainings are better than mandatory trainings. Again, it really can be dependent on kind of the environment you're in, and the type of company and industry. And then just also being aware that, there can be some issues with hiring tests and performance ratings that, bias can also kind of, although they are used to kind of, to help mitigate bias, that they actually can be used to kind of, can be used in a way that actually kind of promotes some of these biases. So we then wanted to go into what are some of the strategies that work. And this is really pulling from some of the kind of human capital, social capital, HR literature to help inform some of these strategies. We have a new faculty member who just came on from UT Austin, Sekou Burmese, and he is kind of an expert in managing human capital, especially in kind of entrepreneurial firms. And so he was really pointing towards some of this HR literature. Again, a lot of these strategies are more broad. They're not necessarily specific to entrepreneurial firms, but I think their application is still relevant for those firms. So our first strategy is really that, companies need to make a good first impression by highlighting how diversity and inclusion matter to your organization. So it gets back to one of our earlier data points when, what are people looking for when they are applying for jobs, when they negotiate, when they're thinking about joining a company or joining a firm. you know, it's important to have the organizational reputation matters, perception, you know, they want to know that workplace diversity is valued, that you can grow in a company that values this kind of, you know, that values diversity. And diversity, you know, here really like broadly broadly based. And so it's really about signaling that your organization cares about diversity, which you can do through reflecting in recruitment ads, making sure that you have, you know, people of color and females as recruiters, participating in diversity fairs, that sort of thing. And then also, like I said earlier, you know, some of your biggest, you know, recruiters and advocates are your current employees. And so having them help you kind of identify and recruit. We had several different articles that just talked about that recruiting from predominantly minority or female institutions of higher education can help. You know, this area is really fortunate to be located near several really outstanding HBCUs. We work quite a bit with NC Central and their Entrepreneurship Center on some of these initiatives, including Henry McCoy. And so, yeah, the research indicates that, you know, recruiting from minority and female institutions, you know, signals to your potential hires, you know, your commitment to hiring from underrepresented groups. You know, the Harvard Business Review article also mentioned that, you know, it's kind of a twofold, is getting managers, you want to get managers involved in this, right? Managers involved in helping to recruit from all sorts of institutions. They see it as a compliment when they're really fully engaged in the opportunity to help the organization identify and hire talented candidates from, you know, these underrepresented backgrounds. So next we talk about addressing company culture to make sure that it's truly inclusive, you know, of women, of parents, people of color, you know, sexual orientation, all of the different, you know, very broadly, you know, different generations. And so thinking about what kind of your company culture and your environment is, you know, one thing that I thought was interesting, we've been seeing more is this concept, you know, more inclusive spaces, more inclusive language, especially in tech. IBM recently started to review some of the common technology terminology, and they started to, I don't know if you all saw this, but, you know, they're replacing some IT terminology that, you know, that currently promotes racial and cultural bias. And so they wanted to look at, you know, how can they promote more inclusive behavior. So they were looking at some of these terminologies and how they could rephrase. Now, granted, you know, changing your terminology is a start. It's not, you know, the be all end all, but you know, that's just kind of one example of what folks are doing. And so finally, kind of our big recommendation is really, you know, especially for entrepreneurial firms, is really start this early. Start thinking about the workforce and the teams, and how you make diversity kind of part of what everything you do, how you recruit and hire and retain. You know, our strategies here are a little less about retaining your workforce, but obviously that is a huge component and maybe something we'll touch more on in our annual report. But I think like the most critical thing is like for startups and entrepreneurial firms to really, and new firms, you know, to really lean in to making diversity a priority from, you know, from day one. So and so that's what I have on our trends. Obviously, I didn't present all of the different data points that we had, but I thought those might be kind of pertinent and interesting to this group. I don't know if you have a few questions before I go through a couple more slides.
We do have a few questions. One of them from Evan was, He's curious about how your research services group developed, since it seems to be doing more advanced work than has been seen elsewhere. And is it possible because you are part of a think tank rather than part of the faculty directly?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it is. And I also think it's because our executive director, Greg Brown, he's a finance faculty member. And so we have really great connections with our business schools, but we also have this very clear directive that translational research is a big part of what we do. And so we've really been trying to leverage kind of the expertise coming out of our centers, our affiliated centers. So the Institute's kind of a weird, interesting model. It's, a center of centers. So you have the main institute that has these kind of service areas. So you have research services as one, you have external affairs as one, you have business development as one, and then we serve the different centers, kind of whatever they need. So we're kind of a centralized place where we provide some research services to kind of our faculty researchers within those affiliated centers. And then, we also do things like, help these centers with events. So that's another way that we really try to elevate thought leadership in the schools. We do quite a few events. We have admin support, we have business development support. And so that really allows our centers to kind of do the work that they do. Our centers really run the gamut between those that are more student focused and programmatic and those that are more research focused. So our tax center and real estate center are really pretty heavily research focused. Our entrepreneurship center is actually probably more programmatic, but they see the value in this translational research. So this was a really close partnership with them to develop this out. On my team, I have a full-time data scientist, a data analyst, and then we have a pre-doctoral research associate. So someone who is planning to get her PhD, but came into the Institute to get a few years of research experience before applying to PhD programs. And then we have quite a few research interns from various schools at UNC.
So another question that came up, and I'm not sure, actually, several people alluded to this, and we might need some clarification. I'd be curious to know if the data includes home-based businesses and side hustles that aren't necessarily incorporated. How do they account for Etsy creators and the like? That was back a few when we asked the earlier questions.
Yeah, that's a sticky question. We have a little bit of data on gig workers in the original report, and I might flub this a little bit. A lot of these data, especially that the academic literature is pulling from, is they get a lot of business registration. So if someone registers themselves as kind of an LLC, if your Etsy shop has an LLC for tax purposes or whatever, then that would register, especially as kind of a sole proprietor. A lot of the data points we're working with, we're looking at, there are some data points where we can pull out some of the kind of the larger kind of high growth firms where we're looking at the employer in firms that have employees. A lot of the academic research that we pull from, those folks are going to kind of the micro data in the census centers, which is kind of a long process to get access to. So we as a research services team don't have access to that. That's why we're really going through the academic literature and translating it. But it's really hard to get kind of really good data on kind of the gig economy, and also folks, like coming out of Etsy and things like that.
So we just have a couple of minutes left, and I think it's really important for Ashley to share her call of action to you. We literally have about 2 to 3 minutes. One other thing I want to point out, though, is that these slides will be posted. She has a very extensive bibliography at the end of the presentation, so you'll have access to all of these other questions that you can't ask. We'll also provide her email address. It's on the presentation, But like I said, she's got about 2 minutes, 3 minutes or so to share her call of action. And that's super important, I think, for this group. So thanks, Ashley. We appreciate everything.
Yeah, thank you all. Yeah, so my call of action is really, we have our website, frontiers.unc.edu. Download the report. We have the annual and then the quarterly updates. Like I said, we are now planning, our next report's going to come out in April, and we're starting to plan for it now. We would love your feedback. We would love your recommendations on additional topics. We have a kind of a Frontiers at Kenan Flagler. I recommend just reaching out to me directly though, because I'm happy to talk with y'all. Especially if you have ideas for potential future trends or topics or papers that you want to share. Obviously, I'd love your feedback too. But we're really kind of forward thinking about what's coming up. So hearing about what's happening in y'all's spaces, in your communities, and whether you're at an academic institution or kind of a local library, we want to know what people are talking and thinking about, and ways that we could use this report to really help support those folks. We also have our Frontiers of Entrepreneurship Conference, April 22nd and 23rd. So if you're interested, it is going to be virtual this year. So registration for that will be coming soon. And then I also just want to point you to some additional resources at the Institute. So we have an Insight series. This is really kind of our main vehicle for translating research coming out of the Academy. It's on a breadth of different topics, but entrepreneurship is kind of a major theme or thread for us. We have an economic growth initiative dashboard. It's really a COVID-19 dashboard. Our director is an economist by trade, and so we've put together some different modelings around, as we reopen and things like that. A really great business incubator guide. So those folks who are, especially when you're working in the communities, NC Growth, which is our economic development arm, has put together this really awesome business incubator guide for communities that are thinking about starting a business incubator. They also have developed out an economic development case study tool, so you can learn about what different communities are doing, especially around helping small businesses or helping new firms. And then finally, they've put together a small business and economic development resources page. Although their name is NC Growth, these different tools really are national in scope, so really can inform folks from anywhere. And so with that, that's it. I appreciate you all letting me come and share this report with you. Like I said, there's a lot more in the annual report that I wasn't able to cover, so I invite you to go check it out. And again, feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer any additional questions or take advice or suggestions. Like I said, the first one was our first iteration, our inaugural report, and so we're hoping to make the next one even better.
Thank you again. Have a great weekend,
Appreciate it.
Ashley.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's great.